What's going on, guys, and welcome back to the world's okayest physical therapist podcast. I'm your host, Dr. H, and today we're taking a look at is PT unprofessional now, with a focus on the physical therapy assistants. Now, first, please don't forget to check out all the links down in the description, the Patreon, 10,000. You guys are probably familiar with the spiel by this point, so I'm not going to go over it again, but please consider checking them out as they help this channel. And please don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and share this with everyone you know, as I really am trying to help educate you all and share with you all my knowledge and experience in this American healthcare system. Now, let's get into the PTAs and how they're being affected by this possible Department of Education decision. So, we've already talked about how this decision is reshaping rehabilitation professions, how it's impacting possibly the doctoral education, student debt, and why physical therapy programs are costing so much more. And now we're going to change into focusing on policy changes, reimbursement cuts, and professional confusion that's going on with the physical therapy assistants and where they fit in. And I'm going to be honest, it's taken me several attempts, several shots at recording this, because I struggle to say what I struggle to be concise and precise because there's just so much wrong here. The PTAs are the unsung heroes of our profession. I work in a clinic that doesn't use them because our entire business model is one-on-one care, because I believe that's where we're being driven. But I think the physical therapy assistants are the unsung heroes because of how much they do. And it's hard to do a podcast episode on this without really getting mired down in the absolute failure of the advocacy groups in the physical therapy realm, which I know you're probably tired of hearing me say. So I'm going to try and keep this light, but if I go on a tangent, please know this is the shortened version of that tangent. So let's start with, really easily, what is a physical therapy assistant, and what are they supposed to be? Well, they were introduced in the 1960s, and their intent was to deliver skilled interventions to assist with strengthening gait, balance, and post-op care, specifically for like knee replacements, hip replacements, rotator cuff repairs. And they were supposed to make physical therapy accessible and more affordable. It was the idea of, instead of coming into a clinic and seeing one physical therapist and being charged the rate of seeing a physical therapist, you could see a physical therapy assistant for your treatment, which would save you money. And it also, again, made it more accessible. You could have one physical therapist doing evaluations and reevaluations for a dozen people, while you could have multiple PTAs treating those people day to day. So the physical therapist could only focus on evaluations and reevaluations, which would open up the door for him to see many more people throughout the week, and the physical therapy assistants would be the ones doing all the treatments. More people get seen, yay, everybody's happier. And hopefully they don't have to pay as much, because they only pay the big fees for the reevaluations, because that's where physical therapists make their money, is evaluations and reevaluations. Real quick secret, physical therapists make most of their money on evaluations and reevaluations. They don't make that much money on treatment. The most money they will ever make is your very first evaluation, because they have to do all the thinking, all the typing, and all the brain work to figure out how they're going to treat you going forward. So in a perfect world, you'd walk into this clinic, be seen by the physical therapist who would evaluate you, take measurements, do special tests, distill all that down into documentation, provide a plan of care saying, here's how we're going to get you better, and then hand that plan of care to the PTA, and the PTA and you would hit the ground running the very next time you came into the clinic. So that means that physical therapy assistants were very prominent in skilled nursing facilities, home health companies, rural health clinics. That'd be like clinics that are real out in the sticks, as we say, very, very rural, because that's where they're the backbone of the staff there. But something changed later that fundamentally altered the PTA role, and that would be in 2022, post-COVID, where the Medicare guidelines shifted. There was a major policy implemented because keep in mind, during COVID, there were so many things that were allowed to change, so many changes in the regs, so many temporary changes in how we did things in order to continue to provide people care, in order to try and help as many Americans as possible. Congress eased a lot of things, changed a lot of things, made temporary exemptions for a lot of things, and all of that resulted in increased spending too, because the government tried to prop up and subsidize a lot of things. So in 2022, post COVID, now the question is, okay, how are we going to start scaling back our pandemic level spending? I think that's what the term they used. How are we going to scale back all this spending? How are we going to try and get things back under control, get the national debt back under control? What are we going to do? And so they decided that any services, in part or in whole, that were provided by a physical therapy assistant would be reimbursed at only 85% that of a physical therapist, effectively saying that a PTA is only financially worth 85% that of a doctor. Now, how did they arrive here? Probably a lot of haggling, probably a lot of backroom debates and discussions. But the truth is, this is the nth number failure the APTA had. This is another example of the advocacy, the PACs, whatever committees, whatever groups that are supposed to protect physical therapists and the physical therapy profession, once again failing to make the case that they should be reimbursed the same. Because very quickly, there are several different studies that prove that physical therapists and PTAs working together get better outcomes than PTs alone. And I don't like that study. I don't like those studies that say that. There's multiple of them. I don't like that. As a PT that works in a clinic that's only PTs, I don't like the idea that I'm failing my patients because I could be working with PTAs and getting better outcomes. So I'm not saying this from a position of being excited. I don't like it, but it's the facts. And if you bring those facts to Congress and they still say, yeah, screw it, we're going to cut 85 or 15% down to 85% for the PTA, then you know what their logic is. A doctor is worth X, a non-doctor is worth Y. You are a non-doctor, you are worth Y. I don't care about your outcomes. I care about money. Everybody cares about money. The APTA cares about money. The clinics care about money. You and I care about money. And that's where it all boils down. And the government's never going to be incentivized to care about you and your positive outcomes. They're going to be concerned about how much money you cost them. So when they decided to reimburse at only 85% of the normal rate, despite the PTAs having a fantastic reputation in the literature of getting good outcomes, this started reducing clinics from hiring new PTAs. This caused some clinics to completely eliminate that position. And it turned them to PT techs, aides, and unlicensed staff because you can hire them for $20 less an hour than a PTA in some cases. All of this was happening while clinic expectations of productivity were being increased, not decreased. And as you can imagine, in order to make graph go up, clinic revenue go up, that means wages must stagnate because you can't make the graph go up a whole lot if you start paying people a lot more. I hope that my tone isn't bothering you. But when it comes down to all about the money, we can see everybody's all about the money. The government's going to try and save money. The clinics are going to try and maximize their money. And that's going to leave people out there that are providing the care with less of it. So the PTAs got punished for being PTAs. Not because they weren't good at their job, not because they were asking too much money, but because of a bureaucratic change. And because of a change in policy language. To put it in a catchphrase, clinics and the government were way more focused at looking at a spreadsheet, not the outcomes. And this, of course, led to an identity problem because the PTAs now ask themselves, what are we? Are we skilled care or are we unskilled care? Do we have any decision-making abilities at all, or are we completely reliant on what the PT says? And it also forced them to look at each other across state lines and say, well, why are you able to do spinal mobilizations and joint mobilizations in that state, but I can't do them over here. What's up with that? Why even in the same profession from state to state are things completely different? And it also brought up the specter of, are we all in danger of being replaced by techs because they're far cheaper and they don't require a license? It, it's causing a lot of soul searching going on in the PTAs because they don't know what role they fill anymore. I mean, I think, speaking bluntly, they're always going to fill the same role in the rural parts of the country because that's where they're most needed. You're not going to get away from having them because, unfortunately, due to the economic drivers of our current situation in the country, new physical therapy graduates basically can only afford to live in cities and small apartments and work at clinics to be able to afford to pay off their rent, their living costs, and their student loans, unless they are living with family in the more rural parts of the country. And if they're living in more rural parts of the country, then yes, they can work in the rural clinics. But the truth is, the PTs that are living in rural clinics are very well established, most likely, nearing the end of their career, or they're in their mid-career, and they've been there for a while, which is why they can afford to have been there for a while. These rural clinics aren't going to be able to pay enough to the new graduates to incentivize them to stay very long, because these new graduates are going to require a lot of money to pay off everything. It's one of the reasons why they're probably asking $90,000, $100,000 when they graduate, is they feel the $250,000 student loan debt breathing down the back of their neck, on top of the fact that they need to buy a new car and they need to be able to afford rent. So that's what I mean when I say the economic drivers. If you can't get enough PTs out of the city to come to the rural part of the country, the PTAs are going to always have a home, even if they don't make as much, because somebody has to be there treating. And it has to be somebody with good education and good knowledge, and techs probably won't fit that role. So you can get away with having 2 or 3 PTs in one clinic and having 8 or 9 or 10 PTAs doing all the treatment, and it's still making sense in the rural part of the country. But in the urban part of the country, it's not going to make as much sense, where you have a lot more physical therapists that are willing and able to take less money to work there, because at least now they don't have to drive back and forth, or they're rooming with 3 other physical therapists and they can all afford to pay rent down, things like that. So what's the prediction? Where are we headed? Like I said, PTAs probably aren't going anywhere in the rural settings. They're probably not going anywhere in skilled nursing facilities, and they're probably not going anywhere in home health. They're still necessary, and you're not going to be able to convince enough PTs to leave more urban areas and accept higher costs of living in different areas, or lower pay in different areas that will affect their cost of living. And this is going to be in areas where access is more important than reimbursement. So places where they need to get the numbers in, where people need to be seen, it's going to make more sense. In the areas where reimbursement is more important than access, that's where you're going to see these clinics pushing the PTAs out and pulling in unlicensed techs, up until the point where the government discovers this and starts passing legislation to restrict it, change it, or reduce reimbursement once again. And I just think that makes sense. Educational creep is going to be the same thing that happens, just like with the physical therapy profession, where we upped our education, trying to be independent providers, where we were trying to be autonomous and get doctorate level education, and blah, blah, blah. And we grossly inflated our student debt and all those things. The same thing will happen with PTAs. There will be a push. The response will be, well, if we're more educated, if we're more knowledgeable, if we have better certification, those things, then maybe the government will pay attention to us and give us money back. We already know where that's going to lead. It didn't work for the PTs. There's no reason why it's going to work for the PTAs. It's just going to lead to increased debt. And, okay, tangent time. I can't help it. The APTA made promises in the 90s and early thousands that there would be a vision, that they would accomplish something. They have accomplished a doctorate level education system where the salaries never rose to increase it. The salaries never rose to meet the increased student loan debt. There has been no gross increase in pay, more than inflation. They didn't talk to other groups like insurance and the federal government to make sure that if they went through this motion that it would actually result in a net benefit for the careers, for the field, for the profession. And shocker, they failed the PTs and the PTAs with this reimbursement. And the idea that the response should be, well, what if we go to school longer, go more in debt to get more recognition, still negates the fact that we have not gone to the insurance agencies and the federal government to said, we want guarantees that if we do this, you will give us more. This whole idea of, well, if we just do more, maybe they'll pay us more, is not going to work. The government is only ever going to be interested in trying to save money. And if they're looking at whoever speaks up the quietest as being the target of their cuts, then it comes down to lobbying. It doesn't even come down to your outcomes, right? Like I said earlier, if you sit down with Congress and say, here are the facts, PTAs deliver results, and they go, cool, they're not a doctor, I'm cutting 15%, the results do not matter. That is what Congress has told you. What matters is who's lobbying. Because if chiropractors and other professions out there are the ones lobbying, saying we have X money, we're going to sit down and we want this to happen, and that's what happens, and they're not even using results, if they're not even using data, if they're not even using evidence-based stuff, then it doesn't matter. The data is not enough to convince Congress, but money and lobbying power is. And that's what I take umbrage with the APTA, because this organization has consistently failed at the lobbying part of this. I guarantee you, if a different organization comes into existence, a PAC, Political Action Committee, if it comes together and says, we are just going to take your money and we are going to aggressively spend it on people who we know we can tilt one way or the other to protect our profession and protect us with lawmaking and to go in and stop doing these cuts, people would switch, because the problem with the APTA is nobody wants to back a loser, and the APTA has consistently under-delivered. So every single time the APTA, in all fairness, points the finger at PTs and says, you are failing us by not volunteering enough, by not stepping up, by not being active, by not paying your dues. If you don't pay your dues, we can't win these battles. I guarantee you the reason why people aren't paying the APTA is because they look at it and say, you lose every single battle you get involved in. Why would I sacrifice time with my family and extra money I could spend on them when you are the one that raised my student loan problem? Why would I give you any more money when I could spend $10 over here on this new pack that doesn't have the same bureaucracy as you do, doesn't have the same size as you, but promises to effectively spend it to go to war on my behalf to protect my profession? It doesn't make any sense to keep backing a losing horse. We need some sort of revolution in the PT field. We need some sort of reinvigoration. We need somebody who's willing to create that pack and to step up and say, you know what, forget it. I'm going to start this. It's going to be a small group of people, but we are going to use every tool available to take this money and to spend every dollar that we can, not on ourselves, but on going to war in Congress to protect our profession, because the APTA has failed so horribly that there needs to be an alternative. Okay, which brings me to my last point, advocacy. It hasn't worked for the PTA because their organization is so much weaker than ours as the PTs. The PTA organizations are weaker, so they don't get the same level of advocacy, and they don't get represented when it comes to making policy. And of course, this is all stemming from the problem that they have no national lobbying identity. And if they do have one on the state level, it's obviously very weak. So until something changes in terms of advocacy and spending and lobbying, reimbursements aren't going to change either. And all of this is going to lead to downstream effects on guess who? The patient, who's going to get decreased appointment availability. Because now there's going to be less PTs, less PTAs. And if there's less PTs and less PTAs, there's not going to be as many PT techs either, which just means less care across the board, because the profession is stalling because we're losing 10% PTs a year. And now we're losing PTAs, and there's just going to be less visits available to the public. And this is also going to lead to, of course, decreased continuity of care, meaning if you're supposed to be coming in 2 to 3 times a week, guess what? We got to share all the visits going around, so you're only going to come in 1 time a week. You should be in here 2 times a week, but we can't do that. We don't have enough staff. So you have to come in 1 time a week. And instead, we're going to have somebody else come in and fill your other slot, just that way they can be seen and be treated. Because we're trying to see as many people as we can to help as many people as we can. And this is going to, of course, lead to decreased rural and urban access. We're just not going to have the staff to do it. We're not going to have the numbers to be able to treat the people that need to be treated. And the only way this changes is if we implement some sort of telehealth system. But even then, telehealth still requires one-on-one, I think. So there'd be no current real-world possibility of one physical therapist sitting in front of a screen watching 4 people exercise, which would be, believe me, if that was a possibility, I'm sure somebody would have done it already. But the truth is, it's not there. So even telehealth is not an answer to this because it still has to be one-on-one. So all of this is just going to result on patients not being seen and not getting access to the therapy that they need. In a world where reimbursement is cut by the federal government, or rather, where the entire profession is reliant on the federal money, or the federal government giving them money, and they cut it, the patients are the ones that lose. But that's because we as a profession have been set up to rely on that from Medicaid, Medicare, and so on, for any federal health insurance. So anytime there's a cut, it has massive ramifications. And what it means is the established system, which is based on these norms, expecting this amount of money from the government, who's going to honor their word and not cut the money on them, it's going to lead to lack of access for patients. I'm sorry that I got a little bit heated there and I kind of went off, but that is honestly what I think is going on and what needs to change. Next episode, we're going to take a look at how rural and underserved communities are already paying the price for these policy changes, which is why I get so frustrated, and why access to PT is going to become, pretty soon, a public health issue, not a professional one. Thank you for listening in. Please don't forget to like, comment, share, subscribe, share this with your grandma and everybody that you know. And everybody stay healthy, stay fit, and stay awesome, and I will catch you all in the next episode.